Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to walk you through our last project, which is project number 4, the Topsight field study. So for this last assignment, what we're going to do is focus on how TPC practitioners enact the rhetorical expertise in studying and addressing organizational problems, right? So what this means is we're thinking about communication, information flow within an organization. So to do this, we are going to be reading from a book called Topsight 2.0 by Clay Spinuzzi. And this book will walk us through this process. So the beginning introductory chapters explain a bit about what this sounds like, Topsight, right? Getting a bigger view of an organization and the communication that happens within that. And then it moves on to, figuring out what to study, how to study it, and then implementing this mini field study. So you can see here it's still within the context of TPC and to think about, how this communication happens at work. Now, you can see here, the purposes. So to kind of practice this and think about the dynamics of communication and information activities within this organization. Again, we're going back to the very beginning to see how TPC practitioners enact their rhetorical expertise in these workplaces, right? So going back to that chapter 2. And then lastly, to help the organization understand and address a problem, right? Thereby improving workflow and effectiveness of activities or processes. So you can see there's 3 components to this. So the final project will be all of these put together. However, you can see here, these components lead you to a discussion, right? So this discussion is not graded. This is where you're going to be putting your drafts, getting feedback from me, and then submitting the final pieces of these all together in your final project. So instead of doing peer review, instead of meeting with me, I will be giving you feedback on each piece of your reports before you compile them together to submit them for this project. So again, this is another project that we're going to take step by step. And I know so many of you are going to be like, okay, what does the final thing look like? Put up the video of examples, and I'm going to wait for that because I want you to focus on figuring out what you're going to study and how you're going to study it. So I really want us to read and focus on this first beginning part before we get caught up in what this final project looks like, right? So again, this is going to be done in steps, and I really encourage you to think about each of these steps very thoughtfully before we move on to the next part of this process for this mini field study. So a few parts, and everything's published, so you can go and look at what these different pieces are asking of you to give you an idea. But I do, and most of the readings are there already, so I do recommend go through the readings, read through the methodology that Spinuzzi puts forward. Think about what you want to study. Think about creating this study before getting too caught up in what the final product of this looks like, okay? So some of the logistics, something I have encouraged you to do throughout the course. I encourage you to focus on a problem in your current workplace organization or one that you're already familiar with and have access to. Now, a lot of this methodology suggests human subject research. I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that is difficult in a short period of time, but it's also not necessary for this assignment. So if that is something you choose to do, that is why I ask you to focus on something you're already embedded in, because it will make it easier for you. If you aren't part of a workplace or a site that could be viable for this project, you can talk to me and we can move forward. I've had students do this with identifying with a problem I've identified with our MA program, right? So that's a possibility if you have nothing. I think I've had 2 students go for that. they just weren't very invested in it. So, it turned out okay, but I think I would suggest you really do choose something that is useful for you. And I've had students do non-workplace environments. For example, I had a student do a social Facebook group that they were a part of, right? And communication that happened within that group. So that had nothing to do with work. However, it was an area that they were already familiar with, embedded in, and invested in, right? So again, as I've always asked you, focus on the things that interest you. You will need to get my okay for the organization and permission to conduct the study, and as well as from the key stakeholders of the organization, right? So we're going to read about how to do that. And then you're going to put your proposal in there and also your process work. I believe 9 is a draft of that. So you will get that approved by me. Once you turn that in, I will look at it, make sure everything's okay before you contact the organization that you plan on studying, right? One thing I want to point out is that you cannot study children. You cannot study children, nor interview children, nor study or interview people who are in compromised situations, who might feel coerced. So for example, if you're a boss at your job, I would not recommend studying people who are below you, who you oversee. This is just part of ethics of completing human subject research. So keep that in mind. I will say this a lot in a lot of different ways. You cannot study minors. You cannot do anything with minors. No matter how many times I've said this, students still end up doing this because they don't read the content of this course. And that's violating ethics and laws. So you cannot study children. I will say it again over and over. So this is why, and even within your workplace, you cannot study children. So think about communications that happen, practices, processes that can be refined, and that you see a problem that can be, improved upon. Okay. So then I want to move on to kind of briefly go through the components of this. So you can see first you'll have a proposal, right? I give a chapter about proposals, but there's also in the chapter from Topsight, this is covered as well. I give you the content that I want, right? 3 sections: introductory, study specifics, and conclusions. And then a few considerations to make when you are doing this, right? Keep this in mind, right? You need to get approval from the people in charge of where you are studying. If you are studying people, you are not needing to get IRB approval, which also means this can never be published. This will only be for our course. But you will need to obtain consent, particularly if it's within an organization where you work and you need to ask your boss or something like that. So what else? So that's the proposal part, which will be due in I think a week or 2. The second part is the interim report. This is exactly what it sounds like. So you see here I have including updated design, right? So you have your initial research design, what you think you're going to do. Within a few weeks, you will know whether that's still actually what you plan on doing, right? So you do have flexibility to update. And yeah, I can talk a bit about that later in again, the difficulty with human subjects. But here I ask for give the specifics of the content. This is a very brief, less formal internal report, right? This is me saying, how's it going? And then lastly, your recommendation report. And so here is the final product, the kind of bulk of this project is, after completing this study, demonstrating what should be, putting forth the suggestions of what should be done. So you can see here the major sections of your recommendation report. And again, this is an external document that you would ideally be submitting to whoever you asked to do the report for in the first place, right? So some considerations to keep in mind with this recommendation report. The last thing I want to go over is a bit about the schedule with this. So you can see here, this is the week that we are in. So I have the reading split up between the different phases that Spinuzzi puts forth. You can see here, read introductory chapters 1 and 2, achieving Topsight, about organizations and activities, right? So this kind of lays out the methodology. You can see here, read from phase 2, planning a study. These 2 chapters have to do with designing your study and getting permissions and preparing for the study. We're going to have an optional Zoom meeting this Friday at 5 p.m. And then I went ahead and moved the process work to be due Friday at midnight. That way, if y'all want to come to the Zoom meeting, ask any questions about this process work. And this process work is literally just like, what do you think you're going to do? It is not, I'm not asking for a full-on proposal yet, right? That's coming. So this is just like getting a feel for what you think you want to do. Some of y'all are going to still be like, I have no clue. Others of y'all are going to be like, I know exactly what I'm doing, right? So that's all that process work is, but I want to make sure to give you time to read through some of this, have a meeting with me if you can make it, and then submit this Topsight study process work. Then over the next week, you'll need to read conducting the study, right? Observing, interviewing artifacts and other data. So you can see some of these are, pretty short, and then some of these are very short. Also, these pages are very small. So even the 18 pages is very brief, and a lot of it has examples. So keep that in mind. Even though it looks like a lot of chapters of reading, it's not a lot of reading. And then I ask you to read through that proposal, field study proposal description, right? And then you're completing the process work 9, securing permission. So what this is asking of you is to basically copy something from chapter 5. It's a 3-minute pitch and a site letter, right? And this is just a letter asking the organizational contact to give you permission, right? And a bit about what's involved, right? So you're going to post a draft here so myself and your peers can look at it and then respond. And not until you get an okay with this process work 9 do I want you to actually reach out to the person, okay? A few things I'll remind you of. You cannot ask to study minors. You cannot interview children. You cannot do anything to study children. Children cannot be involved in your study. And then I will give you some examples of if the organizational contact does want you to compose some consent forms. I will give you, the book has some, and I can give you some templates for those, okay? The other thing I want to point out is to be sure you tell them when you need to hear back by. For example, if you email them on a Monday or you call them on a Monday, you want to say, like, please let me know whether I can do this by Friday, right, at 5 p.m. Because if not, sometimes your email falls to the bottom of their inbox and they forget and they say, I'll answer later, and they don't. So this is based off of my own experiences of myself and doing research with human subjects. Give deadlines of when you need to hear back and when you need to do things by, because you need to move on. If you don't hear back from someone, you need to move on with your project. So some things to keep in mind with securing permission. So that is a lot this next week. And then we're going to be moving on. But you'll see how there's going to be a lot of reading and then doing some work based on that reading. Similarly, you're going to have more reading and then doing some work on that reading. And then the same thing this week. I haven't posted these chapters just yet, but more reading and then completing that last part. So you can see this is a normal type of research project. You can see here, because here we are getting together our proposal, getting feedback, figuring out our methods and how we're going to collect data, right? Doing some of that, collecting the data, reading about data, starting to figure out coding and analyzing data. And then this week, we're going to be reading about and practicing coding and analyzing data in order to then write a recommendation report, right? So we're doing this very carefully, step by step, until you get to the very end, your recommendation report, completing data analysis, and then that's it. You're submitting your project, all the parts of it, right? So I want to go back to one more thing But as you can see, this is very carefully scaffolded and will take you through the process. Again, do not get too caught up on the end. Focus on creating the best field study you can for now. So considering, oh, that's what I wanted to do. Considering this timeline, right? Thinking about how, we have a lot of time left, but we actually have very little time left. I want you to keep that in mind. That is why I published all of this, and I'm trying to make sure everything is published and out there so that you know where we're at with this project and what things you need to do first. But one other thing I want to point out is keep in mind when I'm like, okay, you're still putting your stuff together, figuring everything out, but here you're starting to collect data, right? So what I mean by that is that if you have not had a contact with a human and you're doing human subject research by this point, you need to figure something else out. So I have had students who have emailed an organization, and again, this was an organization they were not familiar with. They did not have a relationship with. They did not have any kind of established relationship with them. They never heard back. So then they had to figure out a different route. But they waited too long, and then by that point they had to take a different route. So all that is to say, as we read through this, you'll see here when we're talking about interviewing artifacts, other data, observing, you don't necessarily have to do extensive human subject research. It can really tie you up and hold you back from completing this project. So keep that in mind. This is a short field study. You have options of different types of data that is not just human subject. And also, keep in mind the end goal is improving communication flow. So you can do that by studying artifacts, by studying, documentation, and not necessarily interviewing people, right? So keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you're going to efficiently get this assignment done. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a better idea of this assignment. You can see here I have put the content page has the assignment, the different parts of it, the 2 process works we'll be completing during this, and then this video. And then lastly, the study examples, which I'm going to post that probably the end of this week. Give y'all some time to read through the content of the book before we start looking at examples of this. So again, we are looking at, communication, information flow within an organization, identifying, a problem, a place where it can be improved, and then doing a mini field study in order to understand and put forth a recommendation of how to improve that. So starting point obviously would be to get thinking about, what you want to study, where you see a problem. And this process work is going to be the first thing that you complete. And you can see here just a couple questions, not even definitive answers. Just what are you thinking about? What do you think you're going to do? Some kind of questions to get the ball rolling. So hopefully this video has been helpful and will get you thinking about how to approach this last assignment.